So the first part is figuring out really good questions to write about the books that you read. And I think that this is one of the hardest things about writing a good literary analysis. And the test, and just like life in general, will ask you to do this. Like, I don't know what your experience has been in English classes, but usually an English teacher will give you a prompt to write about, and they will give you the question, right? Like, you read To Kill a Mockingbird, and they will say something about, oh, well, now I'm on the fly. Something about, like, what does Scout's childhood perspective, how does that color the way that she sees her father, or something like that. And then you would write a paper about that, and the thesis is kind of given to you in some ways. All you need to do is answer that question, and that will be the thesis. Is that kind of your experience with literary analysis, right? And there are a couple directions that the AP literature test will give you. Like, they will say, think about setting or something like that, but it's vague like that. It's really hard. Or think about the complex character, and you're just like, I don't know what to write about there. So coming up with a great angle to approach the book is one of the hardest things to do. So that's why we start with it, is because if you can do that, then you can write a great thesis. And if you can write a great thesis, learning how to write a great analysis is like something you've been doing your whole educational careers. So I'm calling those questions guiding questions. And by the way, I think it would be a really good idea to take notes on this. Anytime I'm giving like a lecture like this, you can do that on paper if that's better for you. You could also do it in a Google Doc if you wanted. I'm not going to check your notes. Like, you're at the point now where you can do what you do best for learning. You know yourself. But I will say that a lot of times, like in high school, notes are based on like PowerPoints, and you just write down what's on the PowerPoint or write down what's on the board. And one of the goals I'm going to have in this class is teaching you how to take like great notes. And the way to take great notes is you listen to me talk as well as what I write, and you write down sort of the main points. And if your classmates have anything interesting to say, this will be true when we get into actually talking about the book, right? Then write that down too, because that a lot of times your classmates have better insights than I do. So, when Sam says something brilliant, which he often does, you write that down right away. And if you're being academically honest, you'll write Sam Taylor, so that you know that's not coming from me, that's coming from Sam. Anyway, so take some notes on this as we go. To come up with great guiding questions, first you need to think about the topics that are in the book, right? Let's see, last time we talked about guilt, we talked about women. In this class, did we talk about Sonia's profession? The other class we did, I'm gonna put it up here, we talked about sex work in that class for a little bit. What are some other topics that you see coming up in Crime and Punishment, broad like that? Yeah.
I think so, morality.
Yeah, okay. And is there a way we can narrow that down to a certain moral question or a moral topic? The ethics of, for example, what would you say?
Crime.
Crime, okay. Allie, what were you saying?
Human life.
Okay. Like the value of human life. Okay. Yeah.
I think that the concept of like innate worth.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Good. Other topics that you're seeing in this.
I guess moral intuition versus kind of like utilitarianism or moral calculus, or however you want to call it.
Awesome. I'm going to stick with utilitarianism. Awesome. And then this article that we read for today, what some of the topics that are? Okay, right.
Not necessarily with the article, but like responsibility.
Good. Awesome. What was the article discussing that seemed to be so relevant to our time?
Human isolation.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but you could imagine how we could go on and on and on. The reason that it is considered a good book is because it's not just about one topic. It's not like a essay where it has a focused thesis or a focused thesis statement, right? There's tons of things that we can talk about in this book. So when you are starting to write a guided question, you want to think about which topic interests you the most. And you know, for some of us feminists, like we're going to be like, women, I always want to write about the place of women in society. There's every year I get like one person who's like, that's always what they want to write about. I totally respect that. Or someone might be like, you know, I'm a philosopher. I always want to write about intuition versus utilitarianism, determinism, something like that, right? But you're just finding the topic that you think is interesting in this book. And for me, I'm actually most interested in this topic of guilt right now. I really am interested in this idea too, responsibility or blame. But right now, and what I've prepared in my lesson, more importantly, is the idea of guilt. So I'm going to take that topic and I'm going to kind of separate it from the others. And I'm going to start asking questions about the book itself. Why does Raskolnikov feel guilty? Because I do think, even though we were kind of trying to decide, does he feel guilt? A lot of our questions were centered on, is it true guilt? Like, is this what guilt actually is? Which is like a little more narrow, I think, than I want to go right now. I want to ask, like, why does he feel guilty at all? Because it could be that he feels guilty for killing someone. It could be that he feels guilty that his mom is prioritizing him above his sister. Or it could be that he feels guilty because he's not a great man, and that makes him feel like, oops, shouldn't have done it. You know, so there's lots of reasons here. But then you take that question. Oh, I have one more question. I might say, does Sonia, and in my book it's spelled with a Y, in your book it might be different because different translations, but does Sonia think guilt is a positive or negative emotion? All right, so I've got these two questions. They're very centered on my book though, and I know that because I'm using their names. So I wouldn't be able to generalize that to another book because as far as I know, there isn't another book with a character named Raskolnikov. Maybe I'm wrong, you ever read that book? So what I want to do now is I want to think about generalizing these questions. These are good questions to ask about the book as you're reading. Like what are the motivations here? What is this character thinking and feeling, etc. But from here, especially when you're done with the book, you can broaden it and think about the human condition in general, right? Because one of the reasons that books become classic literature, what we would say they were canonized. One of the reasons that a book becomes canonized is because it has something super important and super unique to say about the human condition. So whenever we're trying to broaden these questions, we're trying to think about how it's not just applicable to Raskolnikov, but it's applicable to me and to you and to everyone. So I'm going to say, what is the use of guilt in our individual lives? I'm actually kind of broadening Sonia's question here. And usually these kinds of questions are just going to lead to more questions because then you start thinking about guilt and how it acts in our culture and in our lives, and when you feel guilty, how you react to somebody else's guilt. So then I'm like, okay, but not just this, but what is the use of guilt in our community? Like, why might we want people to feel guilty? Why might that be something that we like developed, maybe evolutionarily, as a species? Why did we develop guilt in order to live in communities? So that's a question I want to ask. And then I might even take this and just say, is guilt positive or negative? Right? So I'm not just centering it on Sonia anymore, I've broadened it to be about the human condition. However, these are pretty simplistic, basic questions. Like, is guilt good or bad? I don't know. I feel like you would ask that like in a primary class to like a 5-year-old kid, right? Is it good or bad to feel guilt? Does guilt feel bad? And we want to make it more complicated because this is a book for adults that has been written for, I mean, not just adults, obviously, but like it's been read for hundreds of years. So I want to think about what makes this book special. So once I've generalized it, I want to specify it, but keep it about the human condition. So the question I have here, I'm hoping this kind of clarifies this concept, in a society that has largely rejected Christianity, or the Christian ideal of atonement, right? Because we talked last time about he's a student and he's supposed to represent this kind of like rampant ideology that students were feeling in St. Petersburg at the time. So in this society that is largely rejected the Christian ideal of atonement, is guilt a useful behavior or a useful feeling to control people? Something like that. It's not the most beautiful language ever, but do you see how I've taken this idea, is guilt positive or negative in our community, in our individual lives? And I've tried to narrow it down a little bit to make it like, it's now about this Christian ideal of atonement. It's about a community that has lost that. So it's like more specific. Nod your head if that makes sense. Okay, cool. With the mass, I can't see like the faces of epiphany. Just like, oh, I understand. You've changed my life. Okay, and the reason that we do this, obviously, I'm hoping it's obvious, is that this is going to lead to themes. And it's going to lead to themes that are a little bit better than guilt is bad or guilt can be harmful. It's going to lead to a theme that is specific to the book, and yet this great truth about what people are and do. And what's great about this book, and what's great about all the books that we read, I would argue, in this class, is that answer might be contradictory in the book. Like, we're going to think about, how would the book answer this question? You can think about how you would answer it, but how would the book answer this question is a totally different idea, right? And the book is going to be contradictory on this point, and I would argue that's what makes great literature, is they're like, oh, people are complex, and they are, like we talked about last time, doubled or tripled or quadrupled, and so we can't fully explain the truth of a human by saying guilt is bad. So we're trying to find that morally gray area in all of the novels that we read. However, the book will have an answer to these questions. If you're basing it on a topic that is in that book, and if the book is like, and you base it on these questions that are specific to the book and then broaden it, the book will have a clear answer on your question. It might just be a complex answer that contradicts itself. Does that make sense? You know, like the book might say, it's both useful and not useful to control people. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so then next time, we will begin talking about how to answer these questions with the book, and that's where our close reading comes in, and that's where we're going to open up pages and look at what the book exactly, like, says exactly about a certain topic. But if you start here, it gives you a really good direction to go for writing that. Okay. So what I want you to do